And the story that I am going to share with you today has to do with a particular dealer meeting that I was preparing for, and it involved flying first to Dallas, Texas, and then to Lubbock, Texas. And on that flight, an amazing thing happened to me that literally changed my life. Virtually 90 degrees. One moment I was dedicated to aviation, and the rest of my life would be involved in aviation. And in the next moment, I was full of questions, and I was asking the big questions about spiritual truths. And this event changed my life.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
The Smithsonian, if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
All right. UFO good, UFO bad. There's like a Dr. Seuss book that needs to be written here. Maybe we can release it, Luke.
Yeah, children's book.
But it's complicated, right? And people get mad in the comment section all the time about these topics. And I guess that's what we do. We just launch nukes out into the world, and we don't usually comment back because it just gets so hot and heavy. But Gary Stearman is a pastor, and he's an author, and he's been doing this for a long time. And he had a UFO encounter that is kind of one of a kind. Tim sort of teased it many moons ago and talked about how you need to get him on, and you need to let him tell your story. And good thing Blurry Creatures has gotten a little bit bigger, and now some of these people are wanting to come on the show and talk about their weird stories. So we thank you guys so much for listening to this podcast and helping us get some of these weirder stories that some of these people that don't want to talk about these stories, that do other ministries or they're pastors in other divisions of their spiritual life, and the UFO stuff and the blurry stuff isn't real. There's not really a place for it, but there's a place for it here, obviously. And so this is a really good one. I like waiting for a good story, and then he delivered. It's really cool.
Yeah. No, we've been working on this for maybe 3 years now, trying to get Gary on, and
been a while.
It's been a while, and I think this is one of those stories that's so crucial to plug in to your worldview as we try to unpack things like UFOs and the alien narrative and these things that we've touched on in the last 200 plus episodes. It is we've done a lot of deep diving into what are these things and what's happening, and how are we to contextualize this as through a biblical lens, through a biblical worldview, through our faith. And Gary's story, I think, is one of those pieces that's so interesting and so crucial to really providing more context for what perhaps is going on. And I mean, this guy is a guy who dedicated his life since 1969 to the ministry. He's written books, he pastored, he's now with Prophecy Watchers with our friends over there in Monroe Gonzalez and Josh Peck. And it's a pleasure to have Gary on, and real excited to share his story with our audience.
Yeah, thank you guys over at Prophecy Watchers for hooking up a lot of your guests on our show recently. And put this one in your mind, kick it around a little bit. Usually UFO stories aren't good, and this one's gonna make you wonder, like, what happened that day. And I like the timing of it too. Some of these stories that happened in the late 60s and before technologies exploded, and like the Patterson-Gimlin film, the Bigfoot film. It's like a very important time in history when that thing was filmed, because we now have AI and we have all this digital manipulation things. So it's good. It's not that he filmed this thing, but it's interesting at the time when it happened. So if you want to become a member of the show, blurrycreatures.com/members. We got tickets to Squatchella. If you guys want to come see us and a bunch of other podcasts, Confessionals, Ninjas Are Butterflies, and Expanded Perspectives, After Action Podcast, you can go to squatchella.com. There's also a flyer on our website. You can go to blurrycreatures.com, click that, and go get some tickets. We're going to be doing that August 3rd. We also have a lot of things that are available to members. So tickets, events, and BlurryCon obviously sold out. You guys are the best. Thank you for supporting our podcast and helping us keep going. We'll see you guys in August here in Nashville. We don't know what's going to happen. Like we teased in the last one. Who knows, Luke?
Who knows?
But it's going to be fun. So let's get Gary on this one. Thank you guys for sharing the show and listening. Yeah. All right. Welcome back to Blurry Creatures. We have Gary Stearman on the show today from Prophecy Watchers. Gary, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. We, I think it was like a year and a half ago, Tim Alberina was on the show and he kind of hinted at your story, just an amazing encounter with, it's kind of one of those UFO stories. And on our show, obviously, we talk about all the weird stuff through a biblical paradigm, whether it's Bigfoot, aliens, UFOs, all the above, you know. And we get into a lot of the paranormal stuff that happens in the Bible. And I guess the more our show goes on, everything's weird, everything's strange, everything's supernatural. And, you know, we've kind of moved beyond some of these terms. But thank you for coming on Blurry Creatures. And we ask everyone at the top of the hour, what are your thoughts on Bigfoot, Gary? What do you think about the big guy?
Well, I think the only Bigfoot story I've ever heard about that I believed was this famous story about a farmer who looked out his kitchen window and saw Bigfoot coming through his back gate. And he ran to the back door, grabbed a rifle on the way out, went out on his back porch, and unloaded the rifle on Bigfoot.
Wow.
And he said, I hit him. And he disappeared in a flash of light.
Wow.
And I went back in the house, put my rifle down, and finished filling my glass of water. And true story, that he tells that story, and that's the only Bigfoot story that I believe.
Well, you might have a bone to pick with your colleague there, Mondo Gonzalez, because he sent us a photo. We had Mondo on, and he has a crazy footprint photo he took out running one day. That's definitely not my size 14. And not anything that we've seen. So Mondo has a weird experiences too. You gotta ask him about that.
I may be exaggerating when I say that I don't believe in Bigfoot, which I do. And I have a family member who has one of the best Bigfoot stories you've ever heard in your entire life. And if you'd like to hear it, I can tell you about it.
Yeah, by all means.
Yeah.
Well, this gentleman was my great uncle. He was an upper level manager at Conoco Oil Company, and he loved to hunt with his dogs. And he went out in southern Kansas, a beautiful country down there in southern Kansas, and was hunting with his dogs, hunting quail. And his dogs became very excited and ran ahead of him, and he thought, aha, they sensed quail. And they disappeared over a rise in the ground, and he heard the most awful commotion after the dogs disappeared. And obviously they were yelping and screaming and squealing, and then there was no more sound at all. And so he ran up to the top of the hill and looked over, and there were his two dogs down on the ground, literally torn to bits. Now, this is a true story. And he said, I was stupefied, and then I looked to my left and down the hill a bit, and there were two creatures. Or he said, should I say men? But they looked like men, except they were covered with fur that was sort of a light golden color. And he said they had yellow eyes, and they were probably about 7 feet tall. And he said they looked at me, and they gave me the most awful stare I've ever had in my entire life. And I was frozen. And they simply turned. They walked away and disappeared in a nearby forest. And so that's Uncle Ralph's Bigfoot story. And he told it to the family as long as anybody would listen to him.
when you listen to Bigfoot stories long enough, like we have, you start to hear these stories where things happen that don't sound like an animal.
Yeah.
You know, you have this whole paranormal part of Bigfoot that's lights and, like you said, disappears, and some people say he goes through portals, and then the UFOs show up, and it just gets stranger and stranger. And like Heiser said on our show, that if just one of these stories is true, we have to make room for it, right? We have to kind of expand our paradigm. And you have one of those stories, Gary, and I know that, like you said on the top of the hour, this is a personal story. This is something you experienced, and I think it fits in with our show and our audience because we've heard so many of these types of stories. But we'd love to get into your UFO encounter, and obviously we'll just ask some questions, and we appreciate you being willing to share it on our show.
Yeah. Yes, glad to be here. This happened in 1969, and I should point out that I have, for the last 35 to 40 years, been deeply involved in pastoral duties. I pastored a church for 33 years, and I have written many articles, a couple of books, and my entire preoccupation, my entire life, I think, is dedicated to the Lord and to teaching and preaching and writing. But before that, back in the 60s, my career was in aviation. My whole family was in aviation growing up. I don't know, probably most people have forgotten about the old Stearman biplanes that trained all the World War II pilots, but that was my family, and they were all in the aircraft business. I was dedicated to flying, and in the 60s, and we're going to be talking about 1969, I was working for Cessna Aircraft Company in the merchandising department, meaning I was in promotionals. We did films, we did books, we did art, advertising, literature, and so forth, and we put on dealer meetings. And the story that I am going to share with you today has to do with a particular dealer meeting that I was preparing for, and it involved flying first to Dallas, Texas, and then to Lubbock, Texas. And on that flight, an amazing thing happened to me that literally changed my life. Virtually 90 degrees. One moment I was dedicated to aviation, and the rest of my life would be involved in aviation. And in the next moment, I was full of questions, asking the big questions about spiritual truths. And this event changed my life.
Were you Gary, were you flying? Were you piloting the plane?
Yes, I was. I had taken off on a Sunday morning about 9 o'clock in a Cessna 207. It was a beautiful, brand new airplane. The 207 was a stretch model that was designed so that you could take the seats out of it and put it in cargo. And I had a cargo that was going to supply all the needs of the dealerships, putting on dealer meetings. And I flew first to Dallas, Texas, the Cessna dealership at Love Field, and unloaded some materials, about half the material that was necessary for them to put on their dealer meeting. And my intention then was to take off from Dallas and fly to Lubbock, Texas, which I did. And I was flying along, probably about 5,500 feet on a beautiful, beautiful Sunday. And that's where the story starts.
Wow.
And I loved flying, and I was just enjoying myself as much as possible, and even more. Always have loved to fly. And I'm flying along in this beautiful setting, and suddenly something got my attention. And then it looked like something flying along, maybe a mile to my left. And then I noticed a couple or three red lights went on my instrument panel. And I started checking things, and I had no electrical system. It had just quit. And the battery wasn't being charged. Nothing was working. And so I turned off the master switch and made a decision. I can turn around and go back to Dallas, but I think on the battery alone, I can make it to Lubbock, and somebody will be there who can fix it for me. So that's what I did. Trimmed up, continued to fly with the electrical power turned off. Looked to my left again, and there's an airplane over there flying the same direction I am. And that airplane looks like he's headed for Lubbock too, which means that as we get closer, we're going to the airport. We'll be converging. So after a while, I'll see just what or who he is. And I watched, and then I got bored with watching. And then the strangest thing happened. Flying along, and I hear a voice, a very loud and clear voice that said, "If you look to your left, you'll see a UFO." And it sounded like a tour guide. One of these guys that stands on top of a bus with a microphone, and say, "On your left, so-and-so."
Right.
And my reaction, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I'm not going to look to my left.
Yeah.
So I just flew along, and in about a minute, I think I was half afraid to look to my left, to tell you the truth. But in about another minute, the voice came again. "If you look to your left, you'll see a UFO." And I said, "Okay, I'll bite." And so I looked to my left, and about a mile over there was a light. I said, "Well, that's the sunlight reflecting off the wing of an airplane." And he's heading for Lubbock too. That's got to be an airplane. I thought at first it was an airplane. Yeah, that's an airplane. That can't be a UFO. And I had only a second after I thought that. I had just 1 second to sort of settle myself back down, and then suddenly this bright light on my left came right up and flew alongside me in formation. In other words, this bright reflection, which I thought was a reflection off the wing of an airplane, was really a UFO. And it flew over and flew right beside me. And it got big and beautiful in our hurry. And I said, "That's a UFO."
Gary, what is your thoughts on like UFOs before this encounter, like before this moment?
It's fascinating. I had heard a lot of UFO stories, of course, going back to Roswell, and everybody had UFO stories, and all the members of my family swapped UFO stories. At that time in my life, I hadn't devoted much thought except to say, well, maybe they are from some other galaxy or some other solar system. And I didn't think much beyond that. I just thought, well, it's not difficult to believe that somebody would fly here. Someone with high-tech capabilities could fly here and perhaps make contact with humanity. So that was kind of my basic belief. But I did believe in UFOs and the existence thereof because my entire family, being in the aircraft business and being in aircraft design, always swapped UFO stories.
So your family had they seen stuff as well, or they just were telling stories because you guys, that's kind of what nature of the business?
Actually, I had an uncle who saw one.
Okay.
And he talked about it. So I thought, well, he's believable. And I was believable, but sort of nonchalant about the whole thing. I wasn't really driven to find out what they were.
Right.
Until this moment, on my way to Lubbock, Texas, suddenly there it is. And this thing is about 100 feet in diameter, and it's a disc, and it's not a tapered disc. It's probably 10 feet, 12 feet thick. And it was very smooth and round on top and smooth on the bottom. It had sort of a corrugated edge around it. And on top of this UFO that was flying along beside me, there were what looked like rays emanating from the center of the top of the machine. And you could see energy pulsing along these rays or little strips, if you will, of energy. And I was just super fascinated with this, and I even edged the airplane over a little closer and pulled it up a little higher so that I could look down on the top of this thing. And it was just amazing. And I thought to myself, they're real. They really are real. And at this point in time, I knew nothing. That is to say, I was still very ignorant about what UFOs were. In the years since, I've come to some definite opinions about what they are and where they come from and what they're doing here. But at that time, I only barely made the connection between the problem I had with my airplane and the appearance of this device. I didn't connect the two. Later on, I discovered I wouldn't be alive today if that thing hadn't come alongside me, because I really believed that I was in the center of some kind of a battle. And this guy who pulled up on my left and said, if you look to your left, you'll see a UFO, was really a good guy, and he was there to help me out.
Is that voice audible, or is it in your head, in your mind?
It sounded audible. In fact, at first, I said, how can that voice even be talking to me? Because I turned off my electrical. The speaker I had no electrical speakers.
Gary, does that startle you a little bit? Like, what's your take? Because it's like you seem right now like real cool as a cucumber, but you're hearing a voice and you're by yourself in a Cessna flying to Lubbock.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of like, well, I'm not going to look. I actually love that. You're like, I don't know. And then, it's fascinating. And then the UFO pulls up on your wingtip and formation there. And it's not scary. Isn't it not terrifying? It's more like this crazy curiosity. Like, wow, look at that.
It was, I had no fear of it.
Interesting.
And thinking back, I thought, I don't know why I wasn't afraid of it, but I think it was the voice. It was the tour guide voice, that kind of stuff. If I hadn't heard the voice first, I think I would have been scared. But the voice was so friendly. I mean, you just can't imagine this voice out of nowhere saying, if you look to your left, you'll see UFO. I mean, exactly like that. He was being very dramatic.
Yeah, it's like you're on the Jungle Cruise at Disneyland, right?
Exactly.
Look over here, and there's some fake hippos. Check them out.
You got it. That's exactly right.
That's amazing. What happens next? So your electrical panel's down. This thing's flying at your wingtip. You're kind of looking at it, getting up to look at it a little bit. And
now I had taken off from Dallas about 1 o'clock, and I was supposed to be over to Lubbock, to the Lubbock airport, probably 2:30, maybe 3 if I was running really late. And so, fat, dumb, and happy, I'm flying along. This UFO is flying with me. And I'm saying, well, it's going to be good. I'm going to make it. I checked battery power, still had battery power, turned off the master switch, and I thought, I better take advantage of this. That doesn't happen very often. You get to fly at formation with a UFO. So We're flying along. This is interesting. From that point on, I kind of lose track of time. I thought I was flying at normal speed, and would arrive at a normal time at Lubbock. But I flew along, and the next thing I knew, Lubbock was right here. It was just off my nose. And I thought, wow, I got here really quick. So I flipped on the power, turned on the radios, checked in with the tower at Lubbock, and had enough battery power to lower the flaps and everything, and made a good landing, taxied over to the dealership, got out, and here came the aircraft dealer running across the ramp, and he is in a state, to say the least. He is very angry. And he said, you were supposed to be here 2 or 3 hours ago. Where have you been? And I looked at my watch, and wow, it's nearly 6 o'clock. I didn't have enough fuel to stay aloft that long.
Wow.
This guy was very, very angry. We walked into his office, and I told him what I had brought and what I had and how we could unload and so forth and so on. I said, I don't know why I'm late, but on the way here, I saw a UFO. And he looked at me like staring daggers, and he said, I don't want to hear about UFO. There's no such thing as a UFO. I don't want to hear about you. Don't mention a UFO again. And I said, okay, that's easy. Yeah, we got unloaded. Before I went to a motel, we got the airplane in the hangar. I got a good night's sleep, came out to the airport the next morning, and wanted to check on the plane, see if it was possible to get it fixed up so I could fly back to Cessna Aircraft the next day. And I walked into the dealership and back into the hangar, and there were 5 guys stacked around my airplane. And they were up looking over, under, around, and through this airplane. And they said, you're Gary Stearman? Yeah. What'd you do to this airplane? Nothing. It's just the electrical system quit. And there were 4 mechanics and an FAA inspector there, and they said, well, what happened to your airplane can't happen to an airplane. what happened to this airplane? I said, well, the electrical system just shut down. And they explained then to me that they had found the generator drive belt in the bottom of the cowling, and the generator was still locked in place. And he said, this belt cannot have popped off of the pulley. That never happens. And furthermore, the belt lying in the bottom of the cowling is in perfect shape. So it's a brand new V-belt. And what happened? And I said, well, and I thought, should I tell them? And I didn't tell them. I said, all I know is that the red light came on. I didn't have any electrical power, and I made it here just on magneto power alone. Okay. They were mad because they thought I had done something to this airplane. I was in a rather confused state because in some way or another, time had stretched, and I had gotten to the airport much later than I should have. And what was going on? To this day, I don't know, except that I do know this. I think that UFO that came alongside me saved my life. I wouldn't be here today if he had not interceded in some way, because I sensed nothing but goodwill and friendliness from this thing that was this beautiful ship that was flying along beside me. And I couldn't explain to anybody exactly why I was late, what I had been doing. In fact, I was confused. I had like gone to another world and come back. And that's sort of the basis of the story. There are more details, but that's the basis.
What do you think would have happened if the UFO hadn't come alongside you?
I have come to the conclusion over many, many years of just thought, meditation, prayer, much study about the entire UFO phenomenon, to understand the phenomenon of missing time, which, many UFO abductees report. They discover that while they thought they had only been gone 10 minutes, they were gone 3 hours or 4 hours. And so there's this whole missing time phenomenon, which I attribute to hyperdimensionality, popping into another dimension and then coming back. And I believe that happened to me. I believe that this was an angel, if you will, a guardian angel who came and saved me. But the other thing that happened is that from that point forward, my career path changed. I had been intending to spend the rest of my life in the aircraft business. And I was well positioned to spend the rest of my life doing it. I loved airplanes, loved flying. And a series of events happened just after that changed my life. And I became ultimately a pastor, a Bible teacher, and a Bible writer. I love to write on the subject of Scripture and salvation, and have written a couple of books and a number of articles for our magazine, The Prophecy Watcher. And my life had just an incredible change point that I can attribute to that day. In a fraction of a second, my whole life changed.
Why do people say UFO bad, or most Christians think negative whenever they think these subjects?
The Bible talks about principalities, powers, rulers of darkness in heavenly places, and it talks about the sons of God who came down to the daughters of men and corrupted humanity in the ancient days before the flood. And as you read the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, there's this backstory in the Bible of all of the sneaky demonic power structures, all under the management of Satan, are here 24/7 on planet Earth, trying to undo what mankind does, and not very well. In other words, they're trying to corrupt human beings. It's like the book of Job, where the opening chapter of the book of Job has this scene where Satan and a number of his angels are gathered in a kind of a convocation, and there is a conversation between Job and God and the angels, and the story of the book. Satan has an everyday business of trying to undo what man is doing. And Job became an object lesson for humanity because the Lord allowed Satan to curse him. And then when you get to the end of the book of Job, there's kind of a little review But now here's what happened to Job, and here's what God does, and I'm going to explain a few things to you. And by the way, he asked Job a number of questions. I believe he asked Job 60 questions having to do with the world, function of the world, the systems of the world, good, evil, all sorts of things. And from the book of Job and many other books in the Bible, we gain the knowledge that there is a constant, if you will, low-level war going on, just out of our sight. Sometimes we catch glimpses of it, and I think that some of the UFO apparitions in the last 50, 60 years, they're constantly reported. I think those basically are ships used in the fleet, in Satan's fleet, and they are opposed by angels. In other words, there's just as God told Job, there's a constant war. And that is if you will, the underlying story of all Scripture. There's a battle going on. Mm-hmm. There are the good guys, there are the bad guys, and sometimes we get caught in the middle. Job is a famous example of somebody who's caught in the middle, and he is used as an example to us about what can happen, what will happen, why it's happening, the nature of the war that's going on, and the end that will happen, I think, very soon. I think we're at very close to the end game of this battle in the heavens. So, it's difficult to focus down more than that, but I don't know where you want to go from here, but that's kind of the way I feel that these things are happening.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that a lot of times people, especially Christians, immediately have sort of a knee-jerk reaction that everything out there that they don't understand is bad.
Yeah.
And that's a sort of this weird gray space that we live in a lot on our show is, well, Gary, you have this instance where, you think your plane's going to crash and then they have this crazy time slip. But if this thing doesn't come alongside you, your whole life doesn't continue, and all the things that God has done in your life since then don't happen. And how do you explain that?
Yeah. Well, the fact that I'm even doing what I'm doing now, I attribute to just intercession. The Lord interceded in my life, and those principalities, powers, rulers of darkness in heavenly places, I think were trying to do me in. I think they were trying to get rid of me, because they knew the plan that God had for me. I had no idea. But I found myself caught in the middle, being pulled in two directions. And then later on, 5-6 years after this event that I was describing to you, suddenly it dawned on me that I was being directed in ways that I had no idea about. I was being directed into a pathway that would take me to where I am right now. And I was totally ignorant of this until much, much later. I thought back and I thought, well, thank you, Lord. I had no idea that you were going to pull me in this direction, but that's what he did. And then that day, when my electrical system failed, I became part of a, if you will, a battle in the sky. And the battle, thanks to that guardian angel. And by the way, one of these days, I look forward to walking up and shaking his hand. If you can shake an angel's hand.
Yeah.
And were you the guy who said, if you look to your left, you'll see a UFO, and he'll say yes, and he will laugh?
I think that's, I know you were just making a joke, but shaking an angel's hand is a great question. Like, are angels flying these things? And obviously they're building them somewhere. And I don't think that they just materialize out of nowhere. I think this is an actual craft. I think angels are a physical being in their created state. And I think that a lot of times as Christians, we have sort of this other view of these things. Like, an angel wouldn't show up in a UFO and talk to you and save your plane. No, he would be some sort of ball of light that just can travel wherever and do whatever. And it seems as though we give too much godlike qualities to these. They're higher created order than us, but they can't just do whatever they want. But they do have this technology that they use. Do you believe angels are flying around in UFOs, good, bad, and indifferent?
Absolutely. There are evil fallen angels that are flying around in some really nasty ships that do nasty things. The abduction is real. The UFO abduction has become quite the story in our era. And everybody tries to attribute it to visitors from Alpha Centauri or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, they're from right around here. They have slipped through the dimensions, and they can come into our dimension briefly, do what they have to do, and go pop back into their dimension. And that's the way they do their evil. It's the Bible is a hyperdimensional book. You remember Paul said, "I knew a man once," and of course he was speaking of himself, but he just framed the story. "I knew a man once who visited the third heaven, and he went there, and he saw things that are not lawful to talk about, and he came back." And Paul was obviously talking about his own travel into another dimension. And when I first saw that, reading the Bible, I thought, aha, it's all starting to click together. We do live in the midst of a series of interdimensional levels. We are on a particular level. We will not always be here. We'll probably be on another level one of these days. I hope real soon.
Yeah.
We'll be in the level of heaven. But when Paul and I've got my Bible here, and I thought, I've got to read this during this conversation. In Ephesians 3, verses 17 and 18, where Paul says, "I wish that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith, and that you be rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth, length, depth, and height, and to know the love of Christ." And Paul is fervent here. He's emotional. And he says, "I want you to know about all of reality." And people read over this, and what they don't notice is that he mentions 4 dimensions: breadth, length, depth, and height. And the first time I ever saw that, wait a minute, there are only 3 dimensions: length, breadth, and height. Whoops, did I read that correctly? Yes, indeed. Breadth, length, depth, and height. So Paul's talking about a 4-dimensional reality here. We might say length, breadth, height, and time. In my book, Time Travelers of the Bible, I investigated the whole idea that we live in a hyperdimensional reality. And the more you study it, the more you see it, the more you read biblical history, the more you understand that what we think is like a 3D, ordinary, everyday world is much, much more than that. And as followers of the Lord Jesus Christ, we are ushered into this other world. And suddenly that 4th dimension becomes more and more real. And the closer we get to Him, the more we realize, yes, we do live in a 4-dimensional world. And Paul described visiting the third heaven and coming back, and he described 4 dimensions along with the love of Christ. And when you begin to put all these things together, suddenly you realize, wow, as a Christian, I am part of something huge. This is amazing. And all of these things that are inexplicable suddenly are beginning to make sense. And that's where I am. I'm trying to pare this down to a few words, but you can't.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just a giant subject.
I was going to ask you about that, Gary. When you're talking about your time slippage there, as you are, go from the UFO being on your wingtip to arriving above Lubbock, and you talk about losing time. The first thing I thought of was the Betty and Barney Hill incident, which is one of these really famous, UFO abduction stories where they have this crazy time slippage as well, and they have these memories of being abducted, et cetera. But what do you think happens there? So, you spent the rest of your life really contemplating these things, as you said. What do you think happens in those times where people lose time, like you did, because you show up and you're at 6 p.m. and you're 3 hours late. Where do you think you slip into a different dimension? Do you think it's sort of the manipulation of space time, if you will? We talk about dimensionality and quantums. Like what is your conclusion based upon having gone through this exact thing?
Well, having thought about this a few years, this is the part of the story that I try to soft pedal because, most people would say, "Oh, that's crazy." But what happened is that I thought I was flying for another hour and a half to get to Lubbock, Texas. But the clock said, no, you were in the air for 3.5 hours. And I've never been able to quite figure out what the real time was because I wasn't looking at the clock. But I slipped into some other dimension for a while. And then just as the plane reached my destination, Lubbock, everything went back to normal time again. I landed, shut down the airplane, got out, and I looked back to the to the east, maybe 5 miles away from the airport, and there was that guy. There was that light up there in the sky.
Really?
Yeah. And before the dealer came out and read me the riot act for being late, I got out of my plane. I looked off to the end. There was the light. And I thought, oh, he's still with me. Gave me a really good feeling, like, okay, they're still watching out for me. And then as I walked into the office there at the airport, I saw this light disappear and went away. Okay, he's gone. That's good. I'll never see him again.
No, there was no windows on this craft. Just the energy on the top is the only thing you really saw.
I saw actually got an artist's conception, and I wish I could show it to you. But right here is the way this thing looked. It was a disc shape.
Yeah.
And bright spot in the middle, and a beveled outer edge, and the top of it was light. Pulsing light, just all over the top of this machine. There were sheets of what looked like light moving around, and it was just gorgeous. It was beautiful. I couldn't take my eyes off of it, and no fear whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's just, I felt as calm as I've ever felt in my life, and excited even. And so, obviously, I did not meet the dark side that day.
Right.
I think I met my guardian angel, if you will. And I believe I wouldn't, as I've said many times, wouldn't be here today if this hadn't happened. Because I think that something behind the scenes was trying to take me out. And I believe this guy came along and saved my life. And that goes along with a number of biblical narratives where angels intercede to save certain beings, human beings.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting too, from a practical standpoint, Gary, is that you didn't have enough fuel to be up that long. So you had to go somewhere. There's
right.
no way. From a very practical standpoint, you're not going to stay in the air till 6 p.m. because you don't have enough fuel. So you had to go somewhere,
right,
for that time. And I always think the idea of space and time, sort of that concept, is fascinating. And you actually live through that experience, which is it's incredible. It's an incredible story because the trajectory of your life, as Nate said before, and you said, the trajectory of your life completely changes. And you dedicate your life to doing the work of the Lord. And there's a seminal moment where you just turn from aviation to ministry, and you can't help it, as your conclusion is, you can't help it, come to the conclusion you're in a war, and that, that God is, as he does in the scriptures, use his messengers that we call angels. It's just, to intercede on your behalf. And
well, I was gonna say something about the time slippage, Gary, because what we've learned is they have sort of anti-gravity technology.
Yes.
In some of these UFOs. So, couldn't it be that the time, because you're so close to this thing, they affect, the gravity that this is, that it's a bending is affecting the time that you're in. So it can, because some people have said that they've had UFO abductions while they're in their car, and it's like their car's moving, but it's off. It turns off. It's like for that split second, time is frozen when it's close to the UFO, and then it's like, which is how I think UFOs travel. They're not going from point A to point B. They're like moving through time almost. And that's why the G-forces don't kill the occupants inside the UFO. It's like they're, you know what I'm saying? It's like they're being pulled.
Yeah.
And not
a little slide,
not force.
That make 90-degree turns and go 10,000 miles an hour. Which you can't do unless you are in another dimensional modality that we don't know about as human beings. But I believe that Jesus and the angels, if they heard this conversation, would just be smiling and say, what these people don't know is amazing. Right. And we operate by faith. We read the Bible, and we read about people being ushered through time and space. Ezekiel, some of the apostles in the New Testament, Paul, find themselves in different places with no explanation of how they got there in a very short time. And so the Bible gives us a little hint that the 3D world in which we live, actually 4D of length, width, breadth, and time, And to me, time and time space, and what, again, I'm looking at Ephesians here, chapter 3, where Paul says, I want you to be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth, length, depth, and height, and to know the love of Christ. In other words, for those of you who have your ears open, there's a whole lot more here than you think.
Yeah.
And by faith, you are gradually brought into the knowledge of this world, where you experience the blessing of God through Christ. And Jesus himself miraculously went places where you and I cannot go. Like the time he was taken aloft with Satan into a place where he could view the whole world. I don't know how that happened. I mean, I can't even imagine where they went and how they manipulated time, space so that they could look down and see the whole world all at once. But they did it. And by faith, I believe that and look forward to the day when I move into that dimension. Just like Paul said, I knew a man once who went to the third heaven, and I can't tell you what he saw, and but boy, was it great. You know?
Yeah.
Gary, because it feels like there's two schools of thought, right? It feels like the uptick in UFO experiences or sightings, et cetera, has gone up. And of course, we have the internet, and everybody has a camera phone, and everybody has access to a soapbox, if you will, on social media. So the idea that we can disseminate this information and consume it and understand these things are happening. But do you think that it's increasing to a point where we will see these things, you know, as you and I see each other now, like in the sky, and we're going to reach that point where this ultimate battle at the end is fought technologically, if you will, with these craft, et cetera?
Well, you know, it's fascinating. I try not to calculate a date for the rapture of the church. But on the other hand, if you notice how many people are going around saying Jesus is coming soon, well, this involves time and space. Coming soon. Well, when is he coming? Well, soon. Well, you can't name a date. Well, you can name maybe a certain Jewish holiday. He's going to come on that day. And you've heard all the calculations and speculations and so forth where people are trying essentially to guess what the Lord is doing with respect to what's happening on planet Earth. And we develop this consciousness that on Earth we have a certain way that we calculate time. In heaven, they have a different way of looking at time because they have more information than we do. And yet by faith, when the more infused you become with the power of the Holy Spirit and obedience and prayer and fellowship with God through Christ. And the more you move into this dimension, the more you understand that what we're experiencing on Earth is very, very limited compared with the reality of things. And that really fires up your faith, as did me years ago when I realized, wow, there is something other than the dimension I'm experiencing. And that was the day the door opened for me. And from that point on, it's been all studying Scripture, praying for God's will, et cetera, et cetera. It's been a continuous growth, a continuous widening of my perspective.
Gary, what did your family and friends think after this encounter when you were talking to people? Did you tell people this story, or did you kind of keep it to yourself? Or
that's a really good question. When this happened, and I'll never forget this, flying from Lubbock back to the factory, Cessna factory, Wichita, Kansas, I sitting there flying along, and I'm thinking to myself, some really strange things have happened to me. And how am I going to explain this to anyone else? And at that moment I said, zip, I will not mention this, which I did not for about 10 years. Literally didn't say a word about it. And then after about 10 years, I told one very, very close friend as a test to see how he would receive it. And then I went another 10 years. And I told another friend. And it was about 30 years before I really opened up and told this entire story. And I've even recorded a DVD on what happened to me. And the purpose of this is not to tell my story, but to explain how it defines scriptural reality for those who may be doubters. No more.
Right.
This world is an amazing place.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the difficult part about our show is people sort of telling their stories to us, but with, 1 foot in, 1 foot out of like, I know you're not going to believe me. I know you're not going to think this is crazy. And I think for whatever reason, we've created a space where people feel like, okay, all these other strange things have happened to people who've come on their show. And so we feel like we can handle this now. Or are they at least they'll listen to me and give me the benefit of the doubt and say that's possible. And I think of all the wild things we've heard on our show. I mean, this fits right in, Gary, because so many strange things happen in the skies with pilots.
Yeah.
And people in the Navy or the Air Force. There's so many strange things out on the water or up in the sky. And it seems like, you have these places in the world where people just go from our world to somewhere else. Like they go through, we just had a guy who's been doing the investigation on MH370, the Malaysia flight that just disappeared basically. And that's what he's claiming is that there's this technology where these things can open up and they can fly from here to somewhere else in an instant. And
it's the nice word for it, hyperdimensionality. I love that word. It just rolled off the tongue. But here's a kind of a story, and this is a true story. I'll tell it to you rather quickly. About 6 years ago, there was a story in the Daily Oklahoman newspaper. And on the north side of Oklahoma City is a little lake called Lake Arcadia. And people go there, to have outings and to, roast weenies and do some fishing, whatever you do at a little lake. It's a wonderful place. And on a particular evening after the sun went down, there was a group of people on the shore of the lake. They looked out in the middle of the lake and they saw a light, a big round white light under the surface of Lake Arcadia. And they were just fascinated. This was a group of about 20 people, and they were out there roasting weeds and doing whatever else they were doing. And the light rose to the surface of the water in Lake Arcadia, and then it broke through the water and sort of came up out of the water, hovered for a little bit, and then it took off at great speed. And they all talked about this. What a wonderful sight. And as they're talking, the man comes walking down the beach. And he's wearing all white clothing, and he has a white beard, and he's a really, kind of an odd-looking character. And he walked up to this group of people at the edge of the lake, and he said, what you just saw is going to become more and more visible as time goes by, and you don't have to be afraid. This is just something that's happening right now. And he talked to them a while, and sort of, they said that his motive seemed to be to calm everybody down in case they were afraid of what they had seen. And after he finished saying this, he walked on down the beach and just sort of went around a corner, disappeared. So happened there was a reporter from the Daily Oklahoman, and that story got reported in the newspaper. And it was a big front page story on a Monday. And I don't remember the exact date. But the point is, and that whole story has just one point. And that is to say that if you think that all there is in this world is your daily reality, you are sadly mistaken.
Yeah.
And who can believe this? A story in the Daily Oklahoman.
That sounds a lot like when angels show up in the Bible and say, don't be afraid. It's very interesting. What I love about your story, Gary, is that we've talked about this on our show a bunch. Like, the idea that a lot of people that have UFO, whether it be an abduction or an encounter, there's something nefarious and if demonic in nature, if you will. Not that they're demons, but it's evil. And we've always contended that this is the way that perhaps angels travel. We talk about Daniel 9 and 10, and the angel being held up by the Prince of Persia. And you go, well, how does that happen if these things are ethereal and can just poof wherever they want? Well, that doesn't happen that way. In fact, you wouldn't be held up that way. That doesn't actually make sense. And so to have a story like yours where not only do you have this intervention and it's a positive experience, but also that it changes the trajectory of your life and saves your life, is this whole piece that we've been talking about on our show for a while, that all of the UFO experiences and phenomena can be explained by our Bible and it can be explained by our biblical worldview, and that our faith is not too small, but we just have built too small of fences around our faith. But in fact, there is so much within the scriptures and in our faith that we believe in that actually corroborates the things that happen around and explains it. And I was going to say one more thing. I just think that there's this idea, I think, that if there is disclosure, if we are barreling towards this sort of deception, right, where the aliens show up.
I just have to react to what you said. Everybody's read Ezekiel chapter 1. Ezekiel's out there by the river, and he sees this fiery wheel come over. It lands in front of him, and seated under what appears to be a beautiful canopy atop this machine, and it has to be a machine because of the way he describes it, and up there is seated a man. Well, that has to be an appearance of the Lord. The Lord God lands in a machine. And, I mean, it's there for anybody to read. But here's what I want to say. There are two places in the Bible, and you can find them with a quick glance through the thesaurus, but there are two places in the Bible where it says the Lord rides upon the back of the cherubim. Mm-hmm. That's the way the Lord gets around. He rides up, and you can read it for yourself in the Bible. The Lord rides upon the backs of the cherubim. And so I was talking to somebody about this once, and they looked at me and said, well, why would he ride around on the backs of cherubim? I mean, he's God.
Well.
And my answer to him was, because he likes to ride on the backs of the cherubim. And that's the answer. Right. That's what he wants to do. He does it.
Yeah.
We get this little glimpse of the other side and the greatness of the Creator God. And to me, this is the highest aspect of focus that you can possibly come to, trying to understand the Lord God, our Creator.
Yeah.
He will take you to some strange places to bring you to the truth. And he certainly did that with me.
I love it, Gary. Thank you so much for coming on our show and talk about it. My last question is, when you've been up flying in an airplane, do you always get window seat from now on, or?
No. That's funny questions. No, no favors.
You're like, I'll take the aisle seat. Well, I'm fine. I've already seen enough.
I have to confess something going out here, and that is, it's very hard for me to talk about this because there's so many things going through my mind all at once that it's hard to focus down. But it was a life-changing experience, and I can only thank the Lord for having changed the vector of my life as he did to bring me into a place where I could tell people that there really is a God. He really is the Creator. He did send his only begotten Son, that if we believe in him, we're going to have everlasting life in the Spirit. And, and this is the basic message.
I love it, Gary, and appreciate it. Like, I know that Luke and I, we've changed our opinions, and we've accepted so much more as this show's gone on. We started talking about Bigfoot and all the weird paranormal activities around that creature. And for some reason, I think that we feel like sometimes a big part of what we do is trying to get Christians to open their minds up a little bit more to all the things that you talked about on this episode, and to accept that, not everything that we don't understand is bad or evil, or, there's not just demons flying around in the sky, and it's not just fake. There's these things crash sometimes, and people pick up the wreckage, and you have to make room for it. And that doesn't mean that the things in your Bible aren't true. It actually helps support them and make them more true.
Yes.
The more you make room. And so, this story is very important for a lot of people, because I think it helps, them go, okay, I don't have to be fear-based about everything. Not everything is a lie, and not everything is a deception, and not everything is out to kill me. I could start to understand that there are a lot of things that just beyond the veil And like you said, maybe that veil's coming down and we're going to see a lot more weird stuff. But Gary, where can our listeners interact with you? Maybe get the DVD where you talk about this and buy your books and hang out with you.
ProphecyWatchers.com. Prophecy Watchers is just as it said. It says we watch the events. We analyze the events of daily life, and we analyze the words of Scripture for one purpose, and that is to bring people closer to God through Christ. That's what it's all about, and to make it as real as possible. A lot of people say, "Oh, it's the Bible, all that stuff. Yeah, sure, I go to church, but it's all pie in the sky by and by, and I'm just going to live my normal life, and let things happen as they will." And I'm sort of, I don't want to get too close to all this because I don't understand it. And you've heard this kind of an attitude, when in fact that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to look into places we've never looked before and see the glory of God. And it's unfolded bit by bit by bit. And I think you guys really have a good sense of that you're looking in places where not a lot of people look. And that's great. And may the Lord bless your work.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate it. And thank you for being vulnerable and telling your story to our listeners. And I know it's not, no matter how many years have gone by with a lot of these stories, it's still hard to tell. It's still, you're putting yourself out there, making yourself vulnerable. As we've learned on our show, people can be nasty and mean and just very skeptical, and they come at you like, oh, this is all, So we appreciate your honesty and vulnerable heart to share that story with us and we've been waiting a while, so it did disappoint. Definitely one of the best ones we've heard.
Gary.
Well, may the Lord bless your work. May the Lord bless you too, and maybe we'll talk again.
Sounds great.
All right, Gary.
Great to see you.
Okay, you're welcome.
See ya.